Good morning, everyone. I am Edessa Paulzine. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager at WebCourseWorks, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. But before we get started in about a couple of minutes here, I'd like to direct you to your control panel where you will see the Q&A box. Please use the Q&A box to send in questions and comments, and also you can raise your hand if you had a question, and use the chat functionality to send in your chat for everyone to see. We will get started in about 2 minutes here, so sit tight. All right, we've reached the top of the hour, and let's get started with today's webinar. So first, I'd like to introduce one of our speakers today. It's John Alexson. He is the CEO of WebCourseWorks. Dr. Alexson is an educational leader and consultant in association learning technologies and e-learning. He works with an extensive list of association clients on LMS implementation and development, platform alignment and integration, and online curriculum development, giving him a holistic view of business models, operational practices, and educational approaches in association e-learning.
Thank you, Edessa, and welcome everybody. I see people are placing in the chat box where you're from, and we appreciate your attendance here today, and thank you for the introduction, Edessa. We've got a great speaker here today. Rachel?
Hello.
Yeah, so our next speaker is Rachel Clemens. She's the Chief Marketing Officer of Mighty Citizen. Rachel builds things. First, she built a career as a graphic designer, and then she built Creative Suitcase, her strategic communications firm. And for 11 years, Creative Suitcase helped organizations like United Way, the University of Texas, and countless others increase revenue and awareness. In late 2016, Creative Suitcase was acquired by Trademark Media, and together they became Mighty Citizen. As the Chief Marketing Officer, Rachel spends her days promoting Mighty Citizen services and thought leadership. She is also a proud parent of a son named Baylor and 2 pug mixes, Buddy and Biscuit. Rachel, how are you?
Good, how are you? I couldn't leave out the pugs, you know?
I know, and you shouldn't. Never leave out the pugs.
Never leave out the pugs. They deserve their credit.
Yeah.
That's right. Hello, everybody. I want to make sure that y'all can see my screen. It's a green screen. It's marketing or educational products. Everybody see that? Hello?
Yeah, I think they're saying yes in the chat.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I can't see the chat right now. Okay. So I want to start off by telling you guys a story. Now, this is David Ogilvy. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's an ad man from the 1960s. And in fact, a lot of the Don Draper character from Mad Men, if you're familiar with that show, is based on David Ogilvy. He started an agency called Ogilvy, and that agency still exists today. And I want to share this story to illustrate why we're taking time today to talk about writing. So, giving you the premise there. Now, David Ogilvy lives in New York City, and it happens to be the first day of spring in New York. And if you've ever been in New York City on the first day of spring, you know it's a special time. The birds are chirping, the sun has finally come out after months of people being in their winter coats and inside their apartments, and everyone's out and about and enjoying the spring day. And Ogilvy is walking to lunch, and he comes across a man who's living in homelessness and is blind. And this man is begging for change on the sidewalk. And Ogilvy notices him, and he notices that no one else notices this man. And he also notices that the guy's sign reads, "I'm hungry, please help." And he does not have much money in the cup where he's collecting money, right? And Ogilvy is suddenly struck by inspiration, and he asks the guy if he can borrow his sign and pen, and he writes a new message and hands the sign back to the guy, and he goes about his way. Now, the story goes that Ogilvy passes this man again on his way back to the office, and the man's cup is filled with dollars and change, and New Yorkers are stopping and talking to the man, offering him help. So the question is, what did Ogilvy write on this man's sign? And this is what he wrote. "It is spring and I am blind." And I tell this story to showcase the power of language because, let's say, what's effective about this note or this sign? It's made a tangible difference. First of all, it's rhythmic. It is spring and I am blind. It has a visceral feeling about it, right? You immediately feel grateful for the fortune of being able to see and all the bustle and the colors of this New York spring day, and immediately reminds people that they're fortunate and to help others. And so I just share again the story to illustrate why writing and why content is so important and how we can use it in our own content for our organizations. So by the end of the session today, we'll talk about the challenges of writing effective web copy. There's a lot of them. We'll talk about how to improve your copy's readability on your education pages and in other places. We'll talk about pleasing Google. It's actually really important that Google index your pages and send people there. And we'll talk about how to make your content sticky. And I'll describe for you a little bit later what I mean there. So let's take a look first about like what we're up against when we're writing content for the web. The first of these, first of all, attention spans. They did a study in 2000 on the human attention span, and it was 12 seconds. Okay, so not great. Goldfish are 9 seconds as a point of reference there. And so you can see we were barely beating the goldfish. And all they do, y'all, is swim around a bowl. So not real great here. And then they redid the study in 2013. And the results were actually even worse. The results were 8 seconds for the average attention span of a human being. Now, what changed between 2000 and 2013? Lots of things, right? The advent of the internet in a real sense where people are using it in home and work, digital devices, our mobile phones in our pockets, and effectively the internet in our pocket. So lots of things have changed in that time. Our attention spans are shrinking. The good news is that people will give more attention to things they care about, but just know going in that this is a real challenge. We're giving our attention to so many different things all the time. And this is kind of why that is the case. So this is pre-pandemic numbers, by the way. So just thinking about now, when people are on their screens, even more so, these numbers have got to be higher. So some examples, in 60 seconds, so in 1 minute, 4.1 million videos are viewed, 70,000 hours are watched on Netflix. There are 3.5 million search queries on Google. There's so much competition, not just with the people we actually compete against, but with everybody on the internet, with all the things that are clamoring for people's attention. And so we're going to explore how we can smartly, cut through this glut. Another thing we're up against is how people read online. And if you're on to me, you know that this is kind of a trick question. How do people read online? Well, the answer is they really don't. They tend to skim, search, and scan. They don't tend to read online. I'll show you what I mean by this. So this is something called the F pattern. This is a nice long article from Science. And you'll notice that people tend to read at least in Western countries, left to right, they're reading most of that first paragraph. So the F is kind of overlaid where people's eyes are going. Then it goes down the page on the left, and then in the middle where it has this newsletter sign up, they're watching and reading that as well because it's a break from all the content. And so here's the implications of that. People just don't read everything you write. If you're going to write a lot of content, just know most people will not read all of it. You have to lead with the most critical information. So when you're thinking about your education pages, why should anyone care? What is the most important thing to your reader about that page? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And remember that any information carrying words that you need people to know should go along the left side of the page. So for example, if it's really important to your audiences that they're getting credit, continuing education credit or something like that from your content, make sure that that information is along the left side of the page, whether it's a logo or the text itself. Okay, I would love to have you guys chat into the chat box or let me know the answer to this question, or your best guess for the answer to the question, the average American adult reads at which grade level? Just pop in a guess in there. I've seen answers all the way from 3rd grade to 12th grade, so don't be shy. Okay, let's see. Most people are saying 6th grade, 8th grade. All right, well, most of you, many of you, are correct. The average reading level for American adults is 8th grade. If you want to frame a reference for that, that is most John Grisham books. The Great Gatsby was written in 8th grade level. That means that about half of American adults can't comprehend a book above 8th grade level. That doesn't mean necessarily they can't read the words. It just means they can't really comprehend it. So keep in mind that with lots of competition, little reading happening online, and relatively low readability, you want to make your text as simple and easy as possible. Now, some people will say to me, yeah, Rachel, but our audience is they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're people that read a lot. Okay, sure. Yeah, they probably do on average read at a higher reading level. But keep in mind that we're talking about comprehension. And the lower you make that reading level, the easier it is on your reader to comprehend what you're writing. It's just easier on them. And we all are too busy. So make things easier for your user. I want to tell you another story. This is Nora Ephron. For those of you familiar or not familiar, she is an author, a screenwriter. She wrote Sleepless in Seattle and When Harry Met Sally, so I'm a huge fan of hers. She was in, I'm going to go a little bit further back in her history. She was in our high school journalism class. And the teacher says, class, today we're going to practice writing a lead for the student newspaper. And the lead, of course, is the first sentence of a story to lure you in. It's the thing that's going to keep people reading. So I'm going to give you a bunch of facts, and you are going to figure out the lead. So this is what he gave them as far as facts, and I'll read this for you. Kenneth L. Peters, principal of Beverly Hills High School, announced today that the entire school faculty will travel to Sacramento next Thursday for a colloquium in new teaching methods. Among the speakers will be anthropologist Margaret Mead, college president Dr. Robert Maynard Hutchins, and California Governor Pat Brown. So the students get this information, they put their heads down, try to make these facts more interesting and concise. And Nora Ephron, who was already a genius in high school, wrote this. There will be no school next Thursday. And I share this story because it's really important to keep our users at the front of our minds when we're writing content for them. What she knew what students really cared about was not going to school. The other stuff is just like secondary information. So keep that in mind when you're writing for your users. And this can be difficult because we are so embedded in our own organizations. Sometimes it's really hard to put ourselves in the mindset of our readers or our audiences. This is kind of known as the curse of knowledge. And basically the curse of knowledge says that once you know something, it is nearly impossible to imagine what it was like not to know it. In other words, once you know something, it's really hard to remember that you didn't know that at one point because now you know it. So keep in mind that this is something that's so easy about the 6 questions to ask before you start any website project. And it was written by a developer here. And luckily, we have several people that our blog articles go through. And there was so much curse of knowledge happening in this article. We were referencing CMS and AMS and all these things. And I thought, does everybody definitely know what a CMS is and an AMS? And if not, we've got to spell that out. It's so easy when you're working in your space 40 hours a week to forget those simple things that you know that others may not know. So keep in mind that when you write content, it comes packed with all of your knowledge. You got to really put it in the mindset of your users who don't have that knowledge. I want to pause here and ask John, John, do you have any thoughts or comments on anything I've covered so far?
Well, it's a fantastic start here, Rachel.
Thanks.
I think one of the things that I'm looking at here is to improve readability is to shorten it. Keep it simple,
Yes.
which I'm sure you're going to get to.
We are, yeah.
So yeah, and I think for those of us that create content for learning and for credit, it's a challenge, and we all hate that page turner where we're expecting people to read a lot of material online to learn, and that's really it's really a fallacy. I mean, it's really something we need to get in our head that even for learning, we need to keep it short and concise and easy to digest.
Definitely, definitely. So let's talk about how we can improve our readability. So what do I mean by readability? It's the quality of being easy or enjoyable to read. So the keys here are easy and enjoyable. Now that sounds really simple, doesn't it? Make it simple, make it easy, make it enjoyable. But let's talk about how we can actually do that. First thing to know is that the writing is in the rewriting. In other words, your first draft is a stinker. Like it's just not going to be very good, meaning get your thoughts down. You can always edit later. I'll clean up the words of Anne Lamott, one of my favorite authors. You're going to write a crappy first draft. Just go in knowing that it's okay. You're going to have to rewrite it. And you might have to rewrite it multiple times. That blog I mentioned today, we have written that thing. I've now gone through 2 or 3 revisions on it because it just kept having too much cursive knowledge. I kept having to simplify it. And when you're talking about web development, we're talking about a lot of big words. So I'm trying to get it readable down to an 8th grade level. And so just keep that in mind. And by the way, with the readability, if you are writing content for the web and you want to know the reading level of your content, there's a great resource called readable.com. And you can plug in, paste in your content, and it's going to give you the readability level. So it's really handy. It can also tell you how to make it more readable, the content that you've uploaded. The big keys there are typically shortening your sentences. So taking complex sentences and breaking them up into 2 or 3 sentences, and then also your word choice. Okay, so stinky first draft, just note that. Bear with me here. Okay. You also want to cut half of your words. Yes, half. That sounds really difficult, right? I'm going to give you some examples of how to do this. But just know that that's really important to keep your content short and sweet. So here's an example. Please note that although Chrome is supported for both Mac and Windows operating systems, it is recommended that all users of the site switch to the most up-to-date version of the Firefox web browser for the best possible results. Whew. That is 41 words. It was at the bottom of a website talking about which web browser they preferred you use. And so here's how this can be cut down. For best results, use the latest version of Firefox. Chrome for Mac and Windows is also supported. So I went from 41 words down to 17, a cut of about 59%. Here's some other ways to simplify your content. First and foremost, eliminate prepositions when possible. These are those words where, you know, if you can say a squirrel goes about the tree or goes onto a tree, or it's all those like kind of words related to location and things like that. So of, in, for, about. An example, their attempt to provide a justification of the expense was unsuccessful becomes their attempt to justify the expense was unsuccessful. Once you know these things, you find so many ways to cut your content. So definitely be on the lookout for those. Also cutting to be verbs, things like is, are, were, am. So the original is the restaurant's food is excellent. The restaurant serves excellent food. Now this doesn't shorten it, but it does make it more active. Suddenly the restaurant serving becomes the focus. Again, kind of in that same realm, converting passive voice to active voice and having the subject perform the action when possible. So John was struck by the wiffle ball becomes the wiffle ball struck John. In this case, the wiffle ball actually becomes, part of the story in a much more active way. And then lastly, this one is the one I'm really guilty of, filler words and phrases. Things like basically, just, very, really, highly, needless to say, for what it's worth. For those of you that are fans of Sex and the City, I always think of Carrie Bradshaw when she says, I have to wonder. That's a good one for this too. So the original, the community center was really busy this morning becomes the community center was bustling this morning. So keep in mind, if you're using words to elevate, highly, really, then there's a good chance that there's a better verb that kind of covers that. Okay, I'm going to give you, if you want to chat into the chat box, tell me which of these is easier to read. And by the way, they say the same thing on both sides. So you can say left or right. Okay, so people tend to say right. And this is what most people tend to say, that the text on the right is easier to read. And some of that is because of the leading of the words, meaning the space between each of the lines, right? On the left side, it's much tighter than it is on the right. And ways you can make your content easier to read is to add white space. A white space is the space around the text. And so again, between those paragraph breaks, and then also within your text itself. Keep in mind, because people skim and read, the shorter your paragraph, oftentimes the better. So if you've got a big chunk of paragraph, chances are you can come in there and break it up into 2 to 3 paragraphs. Break up your text with images. And I noted here, but only relevant images. So you definitely want images that mean something or add context to the text. Studies show that people don't see stock photos anymore. So when you're thinking about your content for your pages, do you have actual photos from people learning or people engaging with your content that you can use? And then make the page scannable. Again, people don't read everything online. So you want to separate it into headlines, subheads, list. By the way, Google really likes that too. And we'll talk about this in a moment. John, I just want to pause here and see if you had any thoughts or anything to add on the readability side of things.
Yeah, I love white space. I think that's really important. I think the font, the bolding of the right phrases is important since we're scanning.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, when you're scanning a page, it's usually not necessarily the order of the page that people read in, it's the size of the fonts on the page. So you could have something that's halfway down the page, they're actually going to read that before they read the small text above it. So you can use fonts and sizing to be your friend as far as hierarchy goes.
So I'm really crazy. I actually read backwards.
What does that mean? Like bottom to top? Or
yeah.
Okay. What are you looking for at the bottom? Are you looking for like a call to action or something?
Yeah, the summary, or I'm just
Yeah.
I'm scanning real quickly. Yeah, and it's also boring to read from top to bottom.
Yeah, I found that I almost always skip the top 2 to 3 paragraphs of any like article because I kind of get the premise. I get the setup. I just want those bullet points that tell me the 6 things I should be thinking about before I start my website, you know?
Right.
I think most people are like that. So let's talk about how to please Google. And by Google, I also mean Bing or any other search engine that other people are using. But, you know, honestly, let's be real. Google definitely has the corner on the market there. So Google wants engagement. They're looking for your site to offer low bounce rates, longer web sessions, and social shares. So all those things indicate happy users. And so if you have compelling content, you're going to have a greater chance at a lower bounce rate and longer web sessions. They want to see links to other sites from your site, and they want to see links within your site to other content. So when you're thinking about how to really promote your education pages, are other sections of your site linking to those pages? Google likes to see that. It gives more opportunity for your users to go get that content. So when you're writing your blog articles, for example, make sure you're pointing over to your education pages as well. They are more likely to serve up proximity. So if you are in the DC area and you were searching for an agency like Mighty Citizen, Mighty Citizen might come up in your search results because we have a DC office. But if you're searching in Boise, Idaho, we are less likely to come up because we do not have a Boise, Idaho office. So just know that proximity matters to Google as well. Google wants to see the best content on the internet. I get that this is a heavy lift, I really do, but they want to see robust and helpful content with clear sections, visuals, links, and trusted sources. What this means is you do need a certain amount of content on your pages for Google to feel like it's really good content, but keep in mind, it's okay to have quite a bit of content as long as it's scannable and skimmable. It needs to be really short and sweet when you're saying things, but then you can offer up more information as well. So just keep it engaging. That's really the most important thing. Again, you want people sticking around and reading your content. And then lastly, it needs to be accessible. What I mean by this is both easily crawlable by Google, mobile accessible, and of course it needs to be accessible to those with disabilities. So make sure that everybody has access to your website, and that includes Google. So really quick, SEO 101, by the way, SEO is search engine optimization, for those of you who may not be familiar. Again, I'm trying to fight my curse of knowledge here. First and foremost, conduct keyword research. An easy starting point is to go to your own Google on your own web browser and type something in that you think is relevant to your education pages and see what suggestions you get. So that's your competition for those keywords. And there's other keyword research software available as well through Google, where you can go and actually look up what people are searching for relevant to your topics. You want to stay true to your keywords and follow our readability best practices to create something readable and delightful. Now, when you're trying to rank with Google, it's important that you use the keywords that you think people are searching for. So you've got to get those keywords into your content, but you don't want to overstuff them. Back in the early days of SEO, people would throw that keyword in every place imaginable. But just keep in mind that you do not have to do that nowadays, but you do want to use that phrase multiple times in your content. Make sure your main keyword is in your title, your URL, otherwise known as your slug, so that the handle of the URL, the first sentence or two, and that it's repeated a few times throughout. So it's really important that the keywords you're trying to rank for are in your titles especially. And then update your content to keep it relevant and accurate. So a lot of times what happens with the web is we will create a page, a web page, and then we'll kind of, you know, if y'all can hear that, I'm like wiping my hands of it, kind of walk away from it and be like, oh, I got that done on deadline, on time. But that content still lives. It lives beyond that deadline. So you've got to make sure that it's staying relevant, especially as you think about your education content. People get used to the education you have. Are you adding additional relevant information to your education programs? And in that case, do you need to go back and update all those education pages so that that content remains relevant, focused on potentially new laws, things like that? Let's talk about how to make your content sticky. So this comes from a book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. If you are writing a lot of content, I cannot recommend this book enough. And they talk about the 6 elements of sticky content, those being simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories, wrapped around stories. So we're going to go through each one of these, and I'll give you some examples as best I can. So the first one is simple. I want to tell you a story about Southwest Airlines. It was founded by a man named Herb Kelleher back in the day, and his statement was, we will be the low-cost airline. We will be the cheapest airline for the routes that we fly. Nobody will underprice us. And this was a simple guiding message that's really important for marketers. So if you can take the marketing and the education components of your organization and wrap them into a simple overriding statement, that's going to make your job easier every time. And one of Herb's employees came to him and said, you know, Herb, we've done this survey and customers tell us that they would really love a chicken Caesar salad. And Herb said, well, will it increase ticket prices? And the employee said, well, here's the great news. It's only going to increase ticket prices by like 50 cents or maybe $1, like not even impactful, definitely still going to be the cheapest airline. And Herb said, that's a hard no then, because we're not going to do it. It violates our simple mindset. And we need to deny some of our customers' needs in order to keep our costs low, because our overriding principle is we are the low-cost airline. And so I just give this to you guys to say simple is really important, and it can be a really easy way to help you make decisions. So from a guiding brand principle, guiding marketing principle, how can you keep your messaging really simple? And by that, I don't mean dumbing things down. It means finding the core of the idea and expressing it compactly. And by the way, what often happens when it comes to marketing and writing is that, you know, we're telling people something, we're giving them this message for like 6 months, and eventually around month 6 we kind of go, oh, people are so tired of hearing this. They're so sick of hearing this. But the truth is, you're sick of hearing this. You're sick of writing about it. Your audience probably hasn't even noticed what you've been saying for the last 6 months. These things take time. We always want to shift gears faster than our audiences do. Just around the time that they're realizing we're telling them something, oftentimes we're trying to shift gears. So ask yourself if that's happening at your organization as well. And here's some way to find the core of your message. You want to strip out any superfluous elements. Only get to the things that these people need to know. What exactly do they need to know? Remove important ideas that aren't the most important idea. One of the things we do at Mighty Citizen is when we are creating, let's say, a campaign for a client, say it's a membership campaign or something like that. One of the first questions we ask is, what is the most important thing that we're communicating to our audiences? And you could only choose one. There can be subsidiary, like other things that are there that the campaign is meant to evoke, but there's only one thing that this campaign is meant to do. And that's how you drive around simplicity. And then there, with those things, you're left with the simple core idea. Okay. The next step is unexpected. I'm going to play a video for you guys. I am pretty sure the audio is not going to run. So I'm going to kind of, as it's going, I'll play moderator and kind of tell you, I'll just kind of talk over what's happening, especially in case we have any vision impaired people with us. All right, so here's the video. Okay, so this is an ad for an Enclave, which is a minivan. It has a navigation system, lots of room for the kids, the open roof, beautiful music is playing, there's temperature controls, families on the go love this. Oh, and then there's a car accident and a message about buckling up. And so what appears to be a message about a minivan and selling a minivan suddenly becomes the unexpected message of accidents always happen when you don't expect them. And so this is a great ad for bringing the unexpected to the story. And unexpected content can be really sticky if it's both surprising and relevant. It's really important that you're not being gimmicky. A lot of times you'll see in advertising, people are surprising for surprising's sake or like to create controversy or drama. It's really important that your message tied back to the relevancy of what you're producing. So for you guys, how can you use content in a surprising way? We often do this with our subject lines in our emails. We'll do fun things like I had a campaign we were running, and the last subject line of the email campaign was, in the words of George Michael, one last try. So it was like the last gasp email at the end. So it had a high open rate too. I think people were curious. So how can you create unexpected content that's also still relevant to what you're trying to do? There's also an opportunity for relevant microcopy. And what I mean by microcopy are those little hints that happen in our content. So this example is from Yelp. And when you roll over to rate something in Yelp, it highlights each of the stars, and then it gives a little bit of microcopy about what your rating kind of conveys. So for 4 stars, it's, yay, I'm a fan. And I think for 5 stars, it's something like, it doesn't get any better. So they're using this microcopy just to add a little unexpected fun to the project. I think the 3rd star is like, meh. It's kind of funny. Here's another example. This is a quiz that you can take, and you can share the results with other people who also the quiz. And so you begin by kind of naming the group of people you're going to share your quiz with, and their text is my annoying coworkers, which is just kind of funny. It fits in with their brand, you know, kind of snarky. That's not going to be appropriate for everybody, but just look for these opportunities when you can add a little bit of content to add some delight and some unexpected interest. Oh, one thing here too, when you're thinking about your education pages, a lot of times the call to action can be a good way to add these little things. So like, sign me up for the course, you know, after they fill out the form or something like that. Just something that's clear and gives indication, but is also a little bit different than submit, for example. Okay, you want your content to be really concrete. And here's what I mean by this. Of course, we're in Austin, Texas, and so big Longhorn fans here at Mighty Citizen. And a few years ago, we had a coach for our football team called Charlie Strong. And unfortunately, Charlie didn't win a whole lot of football games, which apparently is really important here in Texas. So he's no longer with us, but he had these core values that I think were really impactful. And when you think about core values for a football team, often you think about teamwork, respect, passion, kind of these big overriding feelings, right, around teamwork and things like that. But Charlie's core values were really different, and they were really concrete. So no drugs, no guns, no stealing, no earrings, you must attend class, and you have to treat women with respect. So think about that when you're writing content. Is it clear? Is it cut and dry? Or are you using words like teamwork where people have different interpretations of that? So ask yourself, what is the concreteness of this? And is there some way that I can say it more clearly? So for education, perhaps, what are the outcomes of this training? Really clear, step by step. Like, what are the things that you're going to get out of this? What are the pains that you're going to relieve? And what are the problems that you're going to solve? Just make it as clear as possible. You know whether you're wearing an earring or not, right? It's hard to be kind of fluffy with it. And concrete messages are immune to user confusion. So there, again, there's not a lot of room for interpretation. It's very clear what's happening. The next item in a sticky message is to be credible. And there's several types of credibility boosters. The first is external, and these are really important. These are things like testimonials, awards, reviews. These should absolutely be on your education pages. If you have someone that's taken that course and it has changed their work in some form or fashion, make sure you're getting a testimonial from them. Ideally, you have an image of them as well that is relevant, that shows their human face, because humans like to look at other humans. Use reviews and awards as well. And by the way, external credibility is more important than internal credibility, but you do want to also add some internal credibility. So things like details, data, statistics. Oftentimes what happens with data and statistics is that people use it to paint a picture of like breadth or scope, but they don't actually do a good job of sharing that breadth or scope. So I'll give you an example here. So a couple years ago here in Austin, we had a lot of rain in the month of May. In fact, it rained so much that it was flooding in places that had never flooded. And the local paper ran this infographic, and it noted that 35 trillion gallons of water had fallen in Texas in the month of May. And 35 trillion is one of those numbers where, like, it's like the national debt. You know it's big, but like, I don't really have a frame of reference for how much debt we're in. So 35 trillion sounds like a whole lot, but I can't wrap my head around it. And what the paper did is they really gave the sense of scope and breadth around this by posting some additional graphics that gave relevancy to that number. And so they said 35 trillion gallons is enough to cover the entire state of Texas in 8 inches of water. If you are familiar with Texans, we love to brag. Our state is really big. In fact, it's about as big as France and Germany combined, by the way. Little brag there. But that's a lot of water because Texas is huge and you can cover it in 8 inches. Probably my favorite one is, and by the way, there are about 6 of these, but my favorite one is 35 trillion gallons is enough to supply the entire world's population with 10,000 days of water if everyone drank the 64 ounces they're meant to get every day. So that's 27 years that we could have watered all the humans on Earth with the amount of water that fell in Texas. So if you're going to show data, and oftentimes we want to show data, we want to show our breadth and our impact, Make sure you're tying it to something that's actually relevant to your users. And provide context. Okay, the next one is emotional. And you need to know that humans don't act without emotion. Oftentimes we talk about the pain point when we talk about marketing. What is your user feeling? What's their pain that's going to drive them to action? And so there are 4 major human emotions: glad, sad, mad, afraid. That's not a typo. That's just because it's cute and it rhymes. But there are other emotions that kind of fall out of these. So if you think about joy, well, that's an iteration of glad, right? So when you're thinking about emotion and how you can bring them in, think about how can you elicit one of these 4 emotions in your audience. The most compelling emotion happens to be fear. That does tend to be the biggest motivator, with mad following close behind. If people are afraid, they tend to act. Now, that doesn't mean I'm encouraging you to be manipulative, but if your audience has a clear fear, if their fear they're falling behind in their career, or I'm going to get someone in trouble because I don't understand this law, or whatever that looks like, make sure they know how your offering will offset that fear. And you want to acknowledge that fear does exist. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of how emotion can be used to elicit results. So some of you may be familiar with this campaign. It's the Truth campaign. It's been around since about the 90s or so. It focuses on teen smoking and how to prevent teen smoking. So this is a famous ad of theirs where, you know, it's a body in a morgue and the tag says smoking kills. And one of their biggest stunts was driving up to Philip Morris headquarters with all these vans, and they started unloading body bags, and it represented the number of teens that had died from smoking that day. It was really impactful. They lean on emotion to get people to act, or maybe to not act. In other words, to not start smoking. There's another campaign called Think, Don't Smoke, and this campaign ran around the same time. It's another ad around teen smoking. And this guy's smoking, and another teen comes up and he says, hey, that's not cool. Smoking makes your breath stink, makes your teeth yellow, and all the things you expect from an anti-smoking campaign. And by the way, that guy is the guy from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. For any of you who are like, he looks familiar. Okay, so this campaign was run by Philip Morris. And so you may be thinking, why did they run an anti-smoking campaign? Well, they were actually forced to when they lost a lawsuit. And you'll notice it says, think, don't smoke. So 2 different campaigns. The first campaign, the Truth campaign, reduced smoking by 66%. Okay, so it definitely worked. And this is 66% of teens who were only exposed to the Truth campaign. They were 66% less likely to smoke. Those that were only exposed to the Think, Don't Smoke campaign were 36% more likely to smoke. Is there causation? It's hard to say, but what we do know is that the campaign that used emotion was successful. The campaign that gave all the reasons that emotionally you should not get involved in smoking worked. And the campaign that was focused on logics and thinking did not work. So I know it's really easy to fall back on logic when you're writing your education content, but think about, is there emotion that's involved, and what does it look like, and how can I implement it in my content? So most actions that people take, in fact, every action we take, has some sort of emotional component at its core. So think about that when you're writing your content and how you can use that. Okay, our last element of sticky content is stories. And a lot of times people want to make a claim. They say, we do X, we're known for X, Y, or Z. Last year, we helped this many professionals with this problem. We created this many programs, this many people signed up. While claim making is part of the equation of your marketing, oftentimes organizations use it as a stand-in for some sort of persuasive communication, and that it's not persuasive. When you're making claims, you're actually firing up the skeptical part of your audience's brain and asking them to argue with you. Not necessarily to disagree with you, but you're asking their rational side of their brain to fire up. So we know people don't tend to react to something as much when they're firing with logic, right? So I want them firing with emotion. And the way to do that is versus making a claim is to tell a story. So when you tell a story, you're inviting them on a journey, you're having them see your perspective, you're creating a simulation in your audience's brain. When I told you the David Ogilvy story earlier, you were picturing a sunny day in New York. You were probably picturing the bustle, the smells of the street vendors. Those things naturally happen in a human brain. It's a simulation machine. It hears a story and it cannot help but recreate it. So how can you tell stories in your organization that tie back to your educational products to make people buy them? You want to look for stories in your audience members. And there's 3 different kind of story plots that you can use. The first of these is David and Goliath. We all know this story. It's a common one. You think of underdogs, rags to riches, the triumph of sheer willpower against overcoming odds. So do you have someone in your story who, or in your organization, who had to overcome something through your educational programs in order to conquer this big challenge that they just could not seem to get over? What did that look like? So think about how you can incorporate stories in that way. Another plot is the odd couples plot. People love odd couples. It's why we can watch a 5-minute video of a cat riding on a turtle's back, right? Or the chimpanzee with the dog or the elephant. People love this. And this idea is sort of the story of a massive gap that has been bridged. So if you think about like Annie from your childhood, they run the gamut. So Annie and Daddy Warbucks, very different characters, but they bridged a gap to find success together. So, you know, it overcomes socioeconomic, cultural, ethnic, generational, geographical differences in people. And they're forces that you wouldn't normally put together. They come together to achieve more than they could on their own. So is there someone in your organization who has partnered up with someone else and created change in an unexpected way? Are there 2 people on a webinar or in a lesson that you would never expect to do this together? They totally disagree on something. They're going to come together and give you their points of view. So think of how you can craft these stories within your org. And the last of these is the MacGyver plot. Some of you may be too young to know MacGyver, although I think there's like another iteration on TV now, but it's a show from the 90s. He's kind of this James Bond type character, and he used to solve problems for the government, and he could solve really big problems with like few resources. In other words, he could make a bomb out of like toothpaste and a paperclip. He was one of those really resourceful guys. And this is about someone making a mental breakthrough. Solving problems, solving long-standing puzzles or innovations. It's kind of about bucking the status quo and seeing the world in a new way, inventing new ways or rules, or ways of doing something. People find these stories really compelling. So perhaps, you know, if you've got an education program where someone's sharing a case study on how they broke through or how they changed something or how they innovated, the MacGyver plot might be a really good one for that. And by the way, your plots can be used over and over again. So if your organization just identifies more and has more stories related to David and Goliath, that is okay. Your audience is very unlikely to kind of go, they keep telling us David and Goliath plot over and over again. That's just probably not going to happen. And so just keep in mind, you can tell the same plot over and over as long as the details are changing and you're really crafting those stories individually. Okay, let's do a quick summary. Online content faces a lot of challenges. We saw that chart with the wheel. People have short attention spans. They don't really read much online. And the literacy level is 8th grade. So we've got to make our content really short, sweet, and compelling. The writing is in the rewriting. The writing is in the cutting. You will rewrite multiple times. Make sure you're using structure on your pages for those audience members that skim and scan. We want to make sure we're using headlines, subheads, bullet points, breaking our paragraphs down into multiple paragraphs. Keep in mind that Google values high quality content and high quality links. So they want to see that people are staying on your site, they're interacting with your content, they're filling out your forms and those sort of things. And then sticky content is key. So all the things we just went over. before we turn it over to questions, I wanted to mention we have the slides available at our site, mightycitizen.com/webcopy. Also there, I have a couple of extra tools and templates that might be of interest to you. We have an editorial content calendar template. If you create content on a rolling annual basis, this can be really handy. It's a template itself for you to plug content into. And then we have another webinar called, on-demand webinar called You're a Publisher Now, that talks about, especially for small teams, how you can create content that goes further. So how you can create long form content that gets chopped up and used in multiple ways across all different channels. So with that, I want to maybe turn it back over to Odessa or John and see if we have questions.
Hi, Rachel. Excellent
Hi.
job. Thank you. Awesome ideas. I do have a question for you, though.
Sure.
A lot of us have to work with our members who are experts in a specific area, and they can be really difficult, and they certainly can be very long-winded. So what do you, like, how do you approach or communicate to an expert who just is really long-winded and you're expecting them to do the bulk of the writing?
Okay, so usually a writer needs an editor, and those are definitely two distinct roles. Many times they can edit their own work, but the true beauty of writing is in the editing oftentimes. And so often what will happen is you'll have your subject matter expert write all of their content, and then you might discover that you've got that content, instead of being one blog article or one education program, is actually a series. It is 6 blog articles or so, 6-part series on this topic.
Right.
And so it just requires having someone that's okay with saying, this is great content. I'm going to shape it for our marketing audience, which means people don't read or skim, they skim. And so it has to be a relationship where you value them for their academics and for their insight, and they value you for the value that you bring, which is understanding what works online. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're suggesting set the expectation with our experts that are writing that it's normal to use an editor, and that that it's important to invest in an editor on the association staff side so that the copy can be improved.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about authors, all the best authors have editors. There is not a fantastic author out there who's well known and popular that doesn't have an editor. Right? I mean, at least as far as book publication goes.
Yeah, that's a little secret everybody has, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, what is the most challenging subject that you've had to write about?
Oh. Honestly, the things that push me most are when I have to write about current events. It feels there's a lot of pressure, right? Like when COVID first kind of took over everything, it was like, okay, what's our message to our audiences about what's happening? And for Mighty Citizens specifically, because I do a lot of writing for us, for Mighty Citizens specifically, like we weren't having to tell our clients we're working from home. Like it didn't change their life that we were working from home. So we didn't send any messages to our clients, but it was more about talking to our audiences who are now dealing with events that were going virtual, or fundraisers who had lost their galas. So writing content that was actually really helpful to them quickly is the biggest challenge for me. And then, of course, with the protests that are happening and the changes happening, like we have clients who are asking us to write content for what that looks like for their organization, with their input for sure, but to have us be the editors and the crafters. And so that's really difficult. It's emotional, and it's quick, it's running on a short time frame, and you have absolutely got to get it right. So that for me is actually the hardest part.
And what do you say to educators who say, well, this is really important subject. I don't want to, cut back. I don't want you marketing people messing with it. What do you say to them?
I would probably say, well, do you want people to read it or attend or show up? Right? Like, you can write the most beautiful thing, but if nobody cares, it doesn't matter. They're not going to see it.
So
I think here's another thing. I
Yeah.
always like to fall, but when you're in a debate about like, I think this and you think that, go to the data. Do you have data that shows what people are interacting with or the things that they're actually reading or the things that they're engaged with? And what can you learn from those things that you can bring to this argument as well? So I think if you have, as a marketer or anybody that's relating to the web, you've got to have some of those data points. And so if you can go back to that, it's really hard to argue with data, right?
Okay, so let's give the attendees a chance to ask questions in the chat.
Sure.
We're doing that instructor pause.
I'll start my video too, so
Great.
the others can see me as well.
There was a question earlier during the presentation about, you mentioned, Rachel, that it's important to keep your content relevant. And there was one question from Cindy, and she asked how much updating is required for your content.
Oh, that's a great question. We typically recommend that our clients are evaluating their content on some rolling basis in an ongoing effort. So for example, you may decide that we're going to look at our education section from April to June every year. And that would be a project that you have every year where you're going back and looking at that information. Typically it has to be rolling because there's so much to be done. Having said that, if you are only responsible for the education portion of a website or of the content, then that could be on a rolling basis where you say these months we're going to look at our reports and these months we're going to look at our webinars. But I actually think you should be doing it on some basis that content should be getting looked at annually,
right?
At a minimum.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that association education departments, especially online content, because it's such a elaborate process to get it up there, they oftentimes forget that it needs to be refreshed on a regular basis. So something to start out in the beginning and say, we are going to review this. Another question here. Odessa, you want to?
Yeah, I think it's Cindy, a follow-up question. How much change do you need to do for each blog post?
Oh, not necessarily a whole lot. So sometimes it's just reading through the content and making sure that if you cited any research or any data points, that those are updated and accurate. If there's new laws that have come out, it could just be adding to that. For us at Mighty Citizen, one of the things that we do is we create 2 to 3 new articles every month, and then we revisit an article every month as well. So we say, okay, from a SEO perspective, what are people searching for that would lead them to Mighty Citizen? Do we have some old content that we can refresh and reproduce and update and then re-release it? Because, you might think, oh, well, everybody's already seen that, but they haven't. You hope they've seen it, but they probably haven't. So as long as you're making it more relevant and updated, yeah, I think that's the answer. It's just kind of, yeah, I hope that helps.
Rachel, how do association staff find good writers to add to their team?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, the nice thing about writing and finding writers is that they have portfolios and they have sample work. And so one of the things that we do is when I'm recruiting someone, like say I'm going to put someone on my team, on the marketing team. Well, you've got to be a good writer to be on the marketing team. And I'll definitely look at that cover letter. The cover letter is a required piece of content when we solicit your application. And I'm looking at that cover letter, and the ones who it's shocking how few there are that wrap storytelling into their cover letter. And so when they do, I notice, and I think this person gets it. So looking for a story and identifying what makes you think something about it or makes you care about it, I think those are the marks of a good writer. And so if you can look at samples, that's going to be the best way.
Great. Evaluate how sticky it is, right?
Right. Like, did you keep reading, or did you skip to the bottom like John?
Yeah. Great. Any final words, Odessa?
Yeah, let's give like a minute or so more for, oh, there's one more question. Should you also include a what's in it for them in marketing?
Yeah, ideally the what's in it for them is the entire thing, right? Meaning all of your content should be written toward your audience. So you have to understand them well enough to know why they should care. And so really all of your content should be geared toward their needs. So I think the best way to answer that is to say, yeah, all of it should be about that.
One of the things that we're going through in e-learning, Rachel, is the rise of micro learning. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that's
Somewhat, yeah.
kind of fitting right into your keeping it simple message.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. Everybody's home now too. So like I know early on in this pandemic, there were so many opportunities to do kind of quick learning. And I was just filling up with it. And now I'm kind of like, oh gosh, I just want to get off this screen. So I do a lot of learning actually through audio now. In that
Right. Right. That's great.
Okay, well, I don't think there are any more questions coming in. To all of the attendees, we will be sending the recording of this webinar, and Rachel has a link for the deck, and I will also send that in the follow-up email. But yeah, if there's no other questions, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, John.
I appreciate it.
It's a great session. And yeah, we'll see you guys again soon.
All right. Thanks, Shell. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.